Flip over a sheet of sandpaper before you use it, and you'll find a number printed on the back, something like 80 or 200, next to a texture that feels exactly the way the name promises: gritty, rough, unmistakably sandy under a fingertip. Except almost none of what's under your finger is actually sand. Whatever the name on the package still claims, rub that surface hard enough and you'd be grinding away at something else entirely, something chosen and shaped and glued down with far more care than a name like Sandpaper would ever suggest. So if it isn't sand doing the cutting, what exactly is under there? And how does a flat sheet of paper end up strong enough to strip paint clean off a car door? Let's get into it right here on Small Things. 3 layers, 3 materials. Every sheet of sandpaper is built from 3 layers, stacked in the same order no matter what brand or price you buy. On the bottom sits a flexible backing, paper, cloth, or a tough synthetic film depending on the job it's meant for. In the middle is a layer of resin, the glue holding everything else together. On top, gripping into that resin, sits a dense layer of hard, sharp mineral grains, the part actually doing the cutting. That top layer usually isn't one single material either. Aluminum oxide is the most common choice, tough enough to survive repeated passes without breaking down too fast. Silicon carbide cuts more aggressively and is favored for glass and metal, though it wears out sooner. Garnet, one of the few natural minerals still in wide use, fractures constantly as it works, exposing a fresh edge instead of going dull. Look closely at a fresh sheet, and those grains aren't lying flat like spilled salt. Something during manufacturing makes them stand up, almost at attention, and that detail matters more than anything else in the sheet. Sand was a poor choice. It did not begin with a factory. It began with people testing whatever hard, gritty material they could find lying around, and quickly discovering that ordinary beach sand was a poor choice. Sand grains get tumbled smooth by water and wind over thousands of years, rounding off every edge they might have started with, and a rounded grain has no real point left to cut with, wearing down to dust after only a few passes across a piece of wood. Craftsmen eventually found something sharper sitting closer to home: crushed glass. A broken shard keeps a jagged cutting edge that a smooth grain of sand never had. And for a long stretch of history, the product people actually reached for wasn't sandpaper at all, but glass paper glued onto backing by hand, one sheet at a time, long before any machine existed to do it faster. That basic insight that a sharp broken edge cuts far better than a smooth rounded one is still the entire logic behind the sandpaper sitting on shelves today. Manufacturers eventually moved on from crushed glass to harder, more consistent materials that could be produced by the ton in a controlled process rather than mined by chance or swept up off a beach. But the underlying principle never actually changed along the way. What determines how well an abrasive cuts was never really about whether it came from a beach, a bottle, or a mine. It was always, and still is, the shape of the edge doing the work. Getting every grain to stand up. So how does a factory take loose mineral grains sitting in a bin and get every single one of them to stand upright, sharp end aimed outward, across a sheet of material that might be dozens of feet wide and hundreds of feet long? The backing arrives at this stage already coated with a fresh layer of resin, still wet and tacky, moving fast along a conveyor because that resin starts hardening the moment it hits open air. Sprinkling grains onto it by gravity alone, the way early manufacturers once did, leaves most of them lying on their sides or resting flat against the resin, cutting with a dull face instead of a sharp point aimed at the surface below. To fix that, the factory gives the backing one electrical charge and the loose grains streaming toward it the opposite charge. As the grains pass through the electric field hovering above the backing, that charge pulls them upward against gravity And because of how charge distributes unevenly across each grain's uneven, irregular shape, tends to swing their longest and sharpest dimension into a nearly vertical position just before they strike the wet resin and stay put. None of this is perfect. Not every single grain snaps into a flawless, upright stance, and manufacturers describe the process as improving orientation across the sheet rather than guaranteeing it for every particle that lands. But even an imperfect majority of upright, sharp-edged grains cuts dramatically faster and clogs far less than a surface where the grains simply fell however gravity happened to leave them scattered. Picture the difference between dragging your hand across a floor covered in pins lying flat versus one where most of those pins are standing up on end, points aimed at the ceiling. One barely catches on anything as your hand passes over it. The other bites immediately and keeps biting long after the first surface would have gone dull and useless. Once those grains are set, the sheet still isn't finished. A second coat of resin goes on top, thinner for fine grit and thicker for coarse, sealing the base of every standing grain in place so it can't shake loose under pressure later. From there, the whole sheet passes through a long oven, baked at a controlled temperature until that resin hardens completely, and the sheet comes out stiff and dry. Run past sensors that scan for gaps, uneven density, or grains that never bonded at all before anything gets approved to leave the plant. What the grit number doesn't tell you. It would be easy to assume that once a factory has this electrical trick figured out, every sheet of sandpaper on the shelf gets the same careful treatment and performs about the same as long as the number on the back matches. That assumption doesn't hold up. The grit number itself is simple enough to explain. It dates back to sorting grains through wire mesh screens with a set number of holes per inch. So a screen with 40 holes per inch caught the coarse grains that became grit 40, while a far finer 1,000-hole screen caught grains small enough to polish a surface almost to a shine. Manufacturers still sort by that same logic today, just with far tighter tolerances than a hand-sifted screen ever managed. But that number only ever describes size. It says nothing about what happens to those grains once they meet the wet resin waiting for them on the line. The electrostatic step adds real cost to the line, extra equipment, and tighter process control, and some manufacturers, particularly at the cheaper end of the market, quietly skip it and let gravity do the coating instead, the way factories did it a century ago. The difference shows up the moment you use the sheet. A cheaper sandpaper with randomly scattered grains looks nearly identical to a properly oriented one sitting side by side on a shelf. Same grit number, same rough texture under a fingertip. But dragging it across wood, it clogs faster and wears out well before a properly coated sheet of the exact same grit would. The number on the back tells you the size of the grains inside. It never tells you which direction most of them actually landed facing. People who never think about the grain. At the start of the line, an operator loads a fresh roll of backing onto the feed, checking a work order to confirm this batch calls for cloth rather than paper, since the belts this run will become need to survive a power sander's speed and heat in a way a folded hand sheet never has to. Get that choice wrong at the very start, and nothing the rest of the line does later can fix it. Further down the same building, past the ovens, an operator watches a die press punch perfect circles out of a cured sheet, discs bound for a random orbit sander, while a separate machine nearby splices long strips from an identical roll into continuous loops for a belt sander instead. Same backing, same resin, same electrostatically coated grain, just cut and shaped toward two completely different tools depending on which die happens to be loaded that morning. In a garage on a Saturday afternoon, someone runs a folded sheet across an old tabletop in slow, even strokes, watching a fine cloud of dust rise off the wood with each pass and drift toward the open door behind them. They switch the sheet for a fresh one once this one stops biting the way it used to a few minutes ago, never once wondering what exactly is buried inside the paper doing all that quiet work, or why one sheet from the good box always seems to outlast 3 from the cheap one sitting forgotten in the bottom of a drawer somewhere in the house. Roughness is the appearance. Sandpaper doesn't strip a surface because it's randomly rough. It strips a surface because millions of individual grains were charged, pulled upright, and locked into resin with their sharpest points all facing the same direction before you ever picked up the sheet. Every rough sheet you've ever run across a table, a car door, or a half-finished shelf was carrying that same quiet arrangement underneath it, whether the box it came in ever bothered to mention it or not. Roughness is the appearance. Controlled cutting is the design. If this changed the way you look at the next sheet of sandpaper you pick up, let us know in the comments what you want us to explore next. We might make it our next episode. Thanks for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.